Well, hello again. We're going to be doing another YouTube video, and this time a brief take on Black Man and White Woman in Dark Green Rowboat. What Russell Banks is trying to say here, and he's a writer who said he liked to write things that people could see, and what he's doing here is referring to paintings. For instance, one of the best known is Arrangement in Gray and Black #1, which is by James McNeill Whistler. It's a portrait of his mother, which is how it can often be subtitled. And then, for instance, there's also this, which is Jean Miro, which is, he calls it a uh, dragonfly with red wings in pursuit of a serpent which crawls like a spiral. So, color is often used to describe a painting. You have Picasso's blue period and so forth. And that's what Banks is trying to do here, I believe, is to direct your eyesight, your seeing, your vision toward these two people and the boat, you might say, that they're in, the situation that they're both caught within. Again, it's a pregnancy, and it's in a way a sort of a balance to the hills like white elephants, because here it's the man who's sympathetic and the woman who seems rather self-centered and not so open about her actual feelings, and spends most of her time sunbathing and sweating in the sun and sort of enjoying herself as they're out in the boat that they're both in. As the story begins, it was the third day of an August heat wave, which lets you know right away that it's an omniscient viewpoint or point of view. Whenever somebody mentions just the weather like that, you can pretty much figure it's going to be an omniscient story. And here it's set at a trailer court in the east. Banks is from New Hampshire, and I suspect it's from somewhere around there because he speaks of a tribe of particular Native Americans who lived in that area and set up weirs, that is, fishing traps, in the very lake where he and the young woman go out in the rowboat. I believe he's saying, when he mentions the Native American or American Indian tribe who lived here centuries before, he wants to say or remind us that one of the most precious things to American Indians is their children. They feel that they're not doing what they're doing for this generation, but for their children, if not their grandchildren. What they're doing, that is, they would like to be carried on for generations, and they believe that their children and grandchildren are the most important parts of their lives. So it's set at a trailer park, a lake beside the trailer park. Banks often writes about blue collar people or people who live in this sort of situation, a trailer park situation, who are often looked down upon by other people. But he, as a an intellectual, a writer, does not look down on them. He wants to examine how they get along and how they feel and how they navigate the world that they're in. And here the young man gets into the rowboat. Well, actually, the young woman helps him launch it, as it were. But she gets in the stern, which is be the rear of the boat, and he has his pant legs rolled to his knees, and he gets the boat out on the water. So on the water is where they talk about their situation. There's an island ahead where she could go swimming, but she doesn't. And here I'm just going to touch on some of the central points in the story, not go into too deeply because it's pretty clear cut what's going on. The girl says, "I'm already putting on weight," she said. "It doesn't work that way," he says. "You're just eating too much." "I told mother." The man stopped rowing and looked at her. I told Mother, she repeated. Her eyes were closed and her face was directed toward the sun, and she continued to stroke her cheekbone and lower jaw. Notice the self attentiveness here and her not looking at him, not really straightforward communicating with him. So he asks, when? That is, when did she tell her mother? Last night. And? And nothing. I told her that I love you very much. That's all. No, I told her everything. He started rowing again faster this time and not as smoothly as before. And they're getting out by this island. And the girl says, my mother likes you. She's a decent woman and she's tired and lonely, and she's not your enemy any more than I am. You're sure of that? He made a long cast and dropped the spinner between two large rocks and started winding it back in. No, I know your mom is okay. I'm sorry. Tell me what she said. Uh, and he decides to at least pretend that he's fishing, whether he can catch anything or not on this hot day, probably to keep occupied, suspecting this is going to come up. So the woman here says about her mother, she thought it was great. She likes you. I'm happy. And that's what is really important to her. And she likes you. She worries about me a lot, you know. She's afraid for me. She thinks I'm fragile, especially now because I've had some close calls. At least that's how she sees them. Sees what? And here's a very central point. What close calls has she had that her mother knows about? And she says, you know, depression. Yeah. So what's suggested here is she's been in this close call, you might call it, before. And I believe he senses that. She says, I suppose you'd rather I just did nothing. And he says, yes, that's right. So here he's the sort of solid center of what's going on between them, as opposed to the Hemingway story, where it's the woman who's the kind of the solid center and the man who is egging her on. It seems often beyond her will. Uh, the man said, the black man who's rowing the boat says, I wish I could just leave you here. That's out by this island. What? I said, I wish I could just leave you here, he said in a soft voice and looked down at his hands. And she looked nervously back around because they have to go back because, as it turns out, the girl has said earlier, the woman, listen, I don't know how to tell you this, but I might as well come right out and say it. I'm going to do it this afternoon. Mother's coming with me. She called and set it up this morning. So it's already set up. So, as with a painting, what Banks is suggesting here is the stasis, the stillness, the set in place order that's already there, that's not going to be moved because this young woman and her mother have already decided what's going to take place with her pregnancy. And when they're when he's rowing around a little bit, what's her concern? I wish you could. When he says, "I wish he could just leave you there," and she says, "Be careful that you don't run us we'll run aground in a minute." And she said, take care. That's her concern. Uh, so we get to the end then, and he rowed, and they said nothing more. And in a while, they returned to shore, and life among the people who lived there. Again, this is a real omniscient sort of view of what's going on here. And in a while, they were there among these people, and he goes through the list of those who had appeared one by one from the trailer court earlier on, and they all watched silently as the black man turned away from the dark green rowboat and carried his fishing rod and tackle box away. And then they watched the girl carrying her yellow towel, magazine, and bottle of tanning lotion. Also, she's in an orange terry cloth bikini, or is it a green? Anyway, a terry cloth bikini. They stepped carefully out of the boat and walked to where she lived with her mother. And that's the end of the story. He doesn't attach necessarily meaning to that. It allows you to feel the impact of the situation they're in. He's let you know the view of both of the people. Uh, and the reader ends up aware of what's going on between their lives and aware that the man does not want the abortion. So in this case, anyway, it'd be fair to say that he's the one who cares about the life she carries. And rather than go into this too much uh, further, I want to read a brief excerpt from something I just came across recently. This an essay from a little booklet called "The Art of Making Sense," and the man is talking to. It's a man, Andrew Clavin, who's talking to a group of people who are gathered there, and he said he was always sympathetic to the woman's situation uh, when a woman became pregnant and perhaps felt an abortion was necessary. Because and now I'm going to read. He says, "I was surrounded by stories, women's stories, and these stories made sense. Stories of women who'd been raped or were victims of incest. Stories of women who had aborted children and gone on to live accomplished lives they felt they could not have lived with a child in tow. Stories about women for whom another child would mean poverty and hardship. Stories about all kinds of truly terrible problems that could be solved so very easily by an abortion." And you might add, too, as I will, that some people just want to finish school. That's how it turns out. And he writes, "These stories did what stories do. They communicated the inner experience of being a woman in the world, a woman in a jam, and they touched my heart as they were meant to. But there was one more step I had to take before I could bring myself into alignment with what I knew made sense." And this essay is called "The Art of Making Sense." "I had to begin to hear the stories that were not being told, that could not be told, because, of course, the unborn child can't tell his story. That's the one person in the abortion event who cannot say a word. The unborn son cannot tell you about the times he would have laughed, or the cans he would have kicked down the road on a summer afternoon, or he would have felt like when he fell in love the first time. The unborn daughter can't tell you what dreams she might have dreamed, or songs she might have sung when sitting by herself, or what child she might have made and loved if only given the chance. They can't tell you they would have been baseball players or opera singers or inventors or scientists, or that maybe they would only have imagined being these things and taking pleasure in it, because that's part of life too. They can't tell you that. Yes, they might have been damaged in some way and they might have suffered, but they would have experienced moments of love or joy that flew in the face of that suffering and made their life not only a triumph, but an inspiration." And that's where I'm going to end today. Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry I didn't get to this sooner, by the way. I just got started and we had a snow here. We had nearly 3 inches. It's drifted in some places knee deep because we had a high wind of about 25, 30 miles an hour. And the temperature dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's still pretty cold out there. But I have my outdoor wood burning furnace running now. So I have some heat here. I did not before. And that's what has held me up for a bit. I hope you're all well. I hope you're all doing well. Uh, Hang in there. I'll be doing some more of these talks to you. I hope they help. And I hope you spend the time out there listening to them. And the Lord bless you all and keep you safe as we spend this time apart. Bye for now.